Now, this is an age-old conversation here at the Comics Pals. And it's a hot button issue in the industry itself. Is the future of comic books a digital one? Now, let me paint a picture for you. Comic books have been around for 100 plus years, right? Comic book stores have been around for 50-ish years, maybe a little less than that, but around 50 years, give or take. And, we have less comic book stores than we would like. Comic books are gone from the mainstream in terms of being in, Walgreens or newsstands and things like that. And so, really, the distribution of comics is relatively small. But digital, which is a newer availability, really in the last, I guess, 20 years, 15 years, that cuts out distribution. You can read a Marvel comic no matter how far away an LCS, a local comic book shop, is from you. And you don't even have to worry about your LCS being run by a grumpy old dude who doesn't understand your taste. However, only 10% of comic book readers read their comics digitally. Yes, you heard me right. That means that 90% of people who read comics read them physically, which also means that the industry is held up by comic book shops. So keep these things in mind with the question that I'm going to ask. If the future of comics is digital, that also means that the future of comics is not physical. It's not in comic shops. So to get one, you have to get rid of the other, theoretically, and everything that comes with that. So my question to you guys, I will reiterate, is the future of comics digital?
Yes. I think the future of all physical media is unfortunately digital. With the death of Comixology, and now we just have the Kindle app now. Like, I think last week was like the official end of the Comixology app being usable as well. With that gone, I think there is a vacuum because that still feels a little wonky. And as soon as one of the big two fills that vacuum with digital comics that are easier to get than physical, whether that's cheaper or a subscription, I think then the slippery slope starts, and we quickly move to a fully digital space.
You're saying day and date because obviously Marvel and DC both have digital apps that people use. So
Yeah,
you're
I'm
saying
saying
day
day
and
and
date.
date, and they're cheaper. Because I think a
Because it's
lot of
cheaper.
what drives people to not go digital is because there's no real incentive outside of ease. If I can get the same book for the same cost physically, I think I want that. I personally don't because it's a space issue for me, and I don't have an LCS that is easy enough for me to get to. But I think if it becomes cheaper, I can't see why people wouldn't go digital.
I struggle with this because I think of segmentation. Um, it's Western comics, big two comics. Those things I think are probably going to be stuck in the physical world for a long time, to the point where it may drive it to a place of extinction because there won't be as much growth. Sales numbers are increasing largely because of inflated prices, um, and at some point that bubble's going to burst a bit, I think. And if I'm looking at the holistic notion of what is comics, webtoons, manga, manga continues to grow in digital readership. The subscription services there are excellent. Webtoons is all digital. It's never been physical. It's only now that they're coming into the physical market to try to attract people who still read in that medium to the digital space. DC's dipped their toe in it and it's been really successful. And the payout's different. The conditions for creators are different. And I think that's ultimately something to wrestle with. Do I think Western comics will move to digital? I doubt it. But do I think the future of comics as a medium? I think so.
Yeah, I mean, Western comics are the only ones that it's still stuck in the past in a way. Every other comics is really digital.
majority
this
of
point.
consumption
Yeah,
is.
even like comic
And
strips. Like most people get their newspapers digitally now.
I wouldn't even know where you would get a comic strip actually.
That's a good question. I
Digitally.
don't read the news. I'm dumb.
I think that the future of comics is digital eventually.
Hmm.
But by eventually, I mean a long time from now. I think that Marvel and DC would be happy to, pull the trigger because then they take over. They don't have to worry about distribution. They don't have to worry about, they could just cut out the middlemen. You don't have to worry about paper and all that jazz. The problem is that it's a tightrope in a house of cards in a lot of ways, because if you do that, if they make that choice, then they are effectively killing what is known as the comic book industry. That would have to die. There's no real way around it because comic shops would not be able to continue to function if Marvel and DC pulled themselves out of the physical space. So you have that scenario. And yes, manga is huge. It's the biggest thing going. And digital, I mean, most people read digitally at that point.
Yeah.
Um, I don't think, though, that the only thing keeping physical propped up is price. I think that there's a culture around physically reading comics that doesn't exist in other spaces. It's similar to people's enjoyment of vinyl. Uh, Music is a thing, and most people consume music digitally. Most people. You don't really have that many people going out and buying CDs anymore. But there's a subsection of people who love music that continue to buy physical because they love it. They enjoy the pilgrimage of going and getting a vinyl or a new vinyl announcement. It's not the way it was when vinyl was the only game in town, but there's still people who like it. And I think the that's true in a larger sense for comics. 90% is an enormous number. And I think that in that 90, most of those people are like me in the sense that they've been reading comics for a really long time. They are analog in most of their enjoyment of things when they can be, and they enjoy the pilgrimage and the experience of going and buying and collecting comic books. It is a collectible. You can't forget that.
So do you think it just becomes a niche market at that point? It becomes a niche collector's market?
I think that comic books will continue to get niche until or unless something happens that causes more people to look at it. But
Mm,
I don't think that that is going to happen. And
yeah,
I'm on record. I don't even think that going full digital would change it because I just don't think that comics are in the zeitgeist. You don't have to read comics to get Spider-Man stories. You just don't. There's plenty of great movies and
yeah.
TV shows and video games that can keep you occupied all day without ever touching a comic book. I simply don't believe that there is a fervor for superhero comic books, even though there is a fervor for superheroes.
It's funny. I looked up. I was wondering if comic strips were still in digital newspapers, and I see a post from 2016. Are print comics dead? Is digital distribution the future? And that's what, 8 years ago at this point, and we're probably in the same spot we were 8 years ago
The
in
percentage
terms of
hasn't grown,
Western
and I think,
comics.
yeah, I think it's because of that. It's the culture around it. There's a hesitation still within the people who currently pick up your comic book industry, the Western market there. And I think also there's a level of decreasing readership in general. Like people are reading less and less. um, Content's moving more towards visuals and video, and so the you have to engage in that format. And I think there's a format change of it, which Webtoon capitalizes on a lot because of its scrollability, its large format, and single image, I guess, framing. That makes it also pretty difficult because uh, I think the Sean, you had just said that you don't think there's a space for it in comics. There's not a space for it to grow and attain new people, but anime is the biggest entryway for manga, and it's coming from the visual medium. But I don't think there's that same translation in Western comics. We don't have the video to then, or the TV show to then drive towards a comic book.
We do, and we see those books succeed. What succeeds? Batman, Year One, The Dark Knight Returns, Civil War. You know what? Take your pick, Spider Man. These are books that have been used to translate to other media, and they always succeed. The problem is that there are a million Batmans, and they're still coming out. If you like Berserk, for example, there's one long Berserk comic and an anime that is the exact. I mean, I'm not sure if it's the exact same. I haven't
It's true at
watched
the
it,
moment. Yeah.
but it's the same. It's the same general idea. If you read the manga and you watch the anime, it's the same experience. That's not the case in comics.
Mm, mm.
But people buy the comic that corresponds with the movie. It's just that the weekly book isn't that one.
Right.
Yeah, Supergirl Woman of Tomorrow sold out as soon as that got
Right.
announced as a movie. Yeah.
Yeah. There's no difference in that regard. The difference is that comic books is a weekly, ongoing, never ending saga, and manga is not. It doesn't matter if there's 1,000 of it. You know that one day that shit's going to end, and that everything you have read will be translated into another media that you will probably also watch.
The interesting thing that Marco brought up that jumped out to me was attention spans, and changing attention spans in media. I think comics is a very specific one that I don't think is truly evolving to fit that, scrollability of things and the ability to get bite-sized chunks that you can get in like a webtoons or even in manga. Those things are sometimes optimized for phones. Even like wrestling like WWE is trying out WWE Speed, which is supposed to be like 5 minute point based wrestling made for social media. They've been filming those recently, and but it's an attempt to change things to be. I don't know if that's going to be good, but it's an attempt to evolve to fit newer attention spans and technology and media consumption that I don't think Western comics is doing at all.
To keep up.
They're going the opposite direction. They're making it more expensive and bigger.
I don't think that they have seen any evidence that that type of thing will function in Western comics. And that evidence is coming from the fact that the primary consumers don't care about it.
Mm.
And it's the age old question. We've talked about it a million times. What will cause the change? You're never going to get the 90 to switch up. That's just not happening. I'll stop reading comics before I go digital. That's just how I feel. And I know there are a lot of people that feel like me. So forget about that. What is going to cause an uptick in digital readership that doesn't also require any amount of the 90% to make a change?
I think Marvel had a good idea with Infinite Comics and they never capitalized on it. If a Marvel Infinite comic showed up on a TikTok feed, that it showed you like the first page and hooked you, and you can then click on it like a live and then read the rest of the comic. And then it's like, hey, if you want more of this, Marvel Unlimited. Like I think if they can do something like that, I think that's a good way of changing. But there's no effort to do it.
I think also because I have my brother has a bunch of friends. He's 25, turning 26, and all of his friends read manga. They read it digitally. They read webtoons, but a lot of them are um, they're not they can be superhero-esque books. They can be that kind of genre, but they're not reading the ones that Western comics put out. They're not meeting people where these other readers exist. Like if you had swapped out the quality of the individual book for a title, so in this case whatever, the one friend just recommended to be Dog Person or something, and loved it, is reading it, and but if you swap out the title and you keep quality, and maybe that's a Batman book, you can attract somebody to that. I don't think Batman is a character that is not going to entice a reader. So you have to meet the person where they exist, and that's online, and they're consuming it online. And the only way to buy a digital comic is through currently Kindle, which people aren't necessarily going to Amazon to go pick up a comic. or through the DC app, but people don't necessarily know that the DC app exists. There's a lack of brand awareness on that front. Whereas people just know that manga exists, and I can type in and go to a website that contains all of that.
But you had to seek it out. You know that you want manga, so you looked for it. Anyone who said, I want to read Batman comics digitally would not have a problem finding Batman comics digitally. The problem is that there isn't an interest.
There,
People have to know they want it in order to get it, but they don't want it.
and they are also, and that would also necessitate marketing targeting them. And marketing on comics is non-existent
Yeah.
outside of already being in the comic sphere.
I just think when you look at the sales for the classic Batman stories or the biggest stories that have been told in comics, the ones that are associated with movies in some form or fashion, they all do tremendously. I don't think that's any different at all than manga. But there aren't Goku stories that are ancillary, that are told by different people, that are never ending. That doesn't exist.
Yeah.
And I guarantee you, if it did, it wouldn't do as well as the main Dragon Ball story that's still ongoing to this day by the same dude, right?
Do you feel that then that's a detriment to the industry and that is something to be resolved?
No, I
Or
think it's taste based.
oh, interesting.
I feel like I feel personally like people make too much out of the differences between uh comics and manga. I think the biggest difference, the two biggest differences is genre and length. Genre you can solve by just doing more diverse things, even though the market doesn't suggest that that's what people want. But the length thing you can't solve because they're not going to stop making weekly comics. That right there, not being changeable, is the biggest difference outside of the fact that manga's simply in the zeitgeist right now. You read manga and you know that people in your life are going to talk about it. It's just like watching wrestling in the 90s. It's hot.
But then
So
wouldn't that sorry, go ahead, Tyler.
I was gonna say, so Marvel needs its own Toonami to ignite a whole generation of anime reader lovers into manga readers.
Adult Swim. Uh, but I guess the thing that I get stuck on is um you would do that with new characters within DC. I think they put all of their laurels on characters that have existed forever, and there's not an attempt for innovation. The series will end, but there will always be a new manga to come out, a new character from the same publisher, a new set of stories, a new individual ending for that book. But the priority for American comics is we're going to persist with the same characters.
Yeah, because then in American comics, why would a creator want to create a new character when they don't have the rights to it? You know,
Yeah.
so there's all these issues tied in together.
But when they create new characters, it's not like people care. Let's be real. Marvel and DC have created a ton of new characters. People don't care.
Yeah,
There's
like
an
when I was looking
equivalent.
up the image for this episode, um, one of the things that popped up was like the digital DCU thing, where it was like Silencer and Sideways. Like they were creating new characters there. Had those characters
Nice.
lasted? No. Were they good? I loved those books.
City Boy, The Vigil,
City
those new books that they
Boy.
just put out. Marvel and DC have created a ton of new characters that people don't care about. But they
When
care about that book we talked about a couple weeks ago on the show. That's a young reader's book, the one with the character who has ink
oh,
based powers or whatever.
colors, something colors.
Young readers are buying that like hotcakes. Now, maybe if there was an animated movie of that could be on Max or
Mm,
air on Cartoon Network or something, that could hit. And I think that that's the kind of thing that DC can do to attract new readers because there's new readers for that book. Presumably everybody reading that book is new to comics or they're a younger person because that's the target audience. So if you could put out a show that replicates that comic verbatim, maybe it hits. That's the kind of test.
yeah, I agree. Primer.
Thank you. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that exactly would be the thing because at that point you don't have to the priority becomes not about pushing somebody towards the weekly market or towards the IPs that you know and love. This is a new character, it hit, and we're building upon that. And then the next one is going to be a new character that is going to hit and you can build upon. And then you remove the need of, well, when there's the next Batman story, you can keep those readers, you can keep those people, and then you can make that transition into digital.
Right. And if you want that, if you want Primer, all you have to do is buy the one book and watch the one show.
And you're hooked, dude.
But that will never work for characters that are ongoing. I just don't believe that. Unless, I mean, Primer could have an ongoing story. There's nothing wrong with that, but that's not going to attract the readership that the one Primer volume will.
Agreed. Yo, DC, what's up? Hire us. Figured it out.
More people have read Batman Year One than will ever read monthly Batman.
Yeah.
But we're not the only people who have opinions about this. Obviously, if you're watching this, you have thoughts on it too. So we want to hear from you. Is the future of comics digital? If it is, what's it going to take to get there? How do you corral audiences to come into the fold for something that has only ever been physically enjoyed and a minority of people like digitally? It's a tough question. It's an interesting question, but I think it's something that the comics industry have to solve, and conversations like this can hopefully help. So thank you for listening. We appreciate you, and we'll see you in the next one. Take care, guys.